Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon.
They said it couldn't be done, couldn't be mapped, couldn't be built, couldn't be conquered. But one thing always proved them wrong. Time. Our time began 20 years ago with an empty lot and a dream full of promise, determination, and audacity. A dream to do the impossible, achieve the unachievable, and defeat the undefeatable. 20 years is not a long time. But as John Huntsman says,
cancer moves fast, and we have to move faster.
So buildings went up, fundraising went up, and hopes went up. Groundbreaking after groundbreaking after groundbreaking led our researchers to the groundbreaking discovery of more genes for inherited cancers than any other institution on Earth. It led them to a Nobel Prize and to the designation of Huntsman Cancer Institute as a comprehensive cancer center, the most prestigious recognition of the National Cancer Institute. 20 years is not a long time, but the strides we've made, the obstacles we've shattered, and the lives we've touched have made the most of every second of it. The world has taken notice, and they have come. From every state in America and every continent on Earth. To work here, do research here, and find hope here. Huntsman Cancer Institute has ignition, fueled by the fury and fervor of everyone whose life has ever been touched by cancer. No, 20 years is not a long time. But then that's our strength, isn't it? Being young, with all the passion, boldness, and optimism of youth. That nothing is too hard, nothing is too far, and nothing that is impossible can't be done.
Hey, man. Great to see you. Hi, Joe White. How are you? Great to see you. Thanks for inviting me. She's very special. But this poor one already knows me, so she knows she's in for it.
Emma Houston, a cancer survivor.
Emma, how are you? Good to see you.
Great advocates of what you're doing.
How are you? Yeah, Doc, how are you?
Clinical affairs, survivors.
How are you? Heard a great deal about you. Oh, great to see you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Okay.
Please. Mr. Vice President, it's a great honor to have you here at the Huntsman Cancer Institute. This is a very, very special place to a whole lot of people. I wish my mom and dad, who are great visionaries, who really put the founding building blocks of this institution in place, were here, but sadly they're not. But we are joined by some very special people here today. I'm delighted to be with our senior Senator Orrin Hatch, who has been a proponent, supporter, advocate, visionary around this institute from the very, very beginning, and he's just been absolutely superb. My wife, Mary Kay, is here, who I know you know, and delighted to have her with us. Governor Herbert is with us with his terrific wife, Janine, and Governor Herbert is delighted that you sent his predecessor to China, because he got an upgrade in life with that one. Our Senate President, Niederhauser, is here, who's been one of the terrific advocates of this institute, along with Senator Steve Urquhart, who has been indispensable and is a wonderful friend. Mayor Biskupski is here, and we're delighted with her new election and prospects for leadership. Jackie, thank you for being here, Mayor of Salt Lake City. Mayor McAdams is here representing the county. Ben, where are you? Thank you so very, very much. A very special guest by way of Elder M. Russell Ballard, a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We talked about the Utah Population Database and the significant contribution that has made, and the church has been absolutely central along with their contributions here to the Institute. So, Elder Ballard, we're delighted to have you here as well. And you're going to meet some of the other panelists here in just a moment, but let me just tell you, Mr. Vice President, we had an opportunity to spend some good time together a while ago talking about cancer. It's now a great privilege to host you at one of the great universities in the land. I know you've been to Duke and Penn, which is also a pretty good school. Now you're here at the University of Utah. You're hitting all of the right places, and you've discussed the moonshot prospects for cancer. And I know how personally you have felt this dread disease called cancer. And a lot of people in this room have felt it very personally as well. And I think they're happy to hear those words from you. I've had the privilege of hosting you the last year in New York City and Washington and even in Istanbul, Turkey.
That's right.
On subjects of international security. But the subject we're here to talk about is perhaps even more challenging, and that is how to rid the world of this scourge called cancer. So in short, we hope that you walk away understanding three features of what makes this community very unique. One is the power of community collaboration. Charles Sorensen is here from the leading healthcare provider. People would think in another world we'd be fighting each other as opposed to collaborating. We do compete, but we also collaborate in ways that I think most communities would find extraordinary. And it's just a microcosm example of what could be done throughout the country. So the power of community collaboration. Number two is the power of the Utah Population Database, which you've now had a chance to take a look at. It is unique to the science that we're doing here, and it could have significant implications throughout the country. The third and final feature that we want you to walk away better understanding is the importance of rural and frontier cancer care. Because you can go to Philadelphia, you can go to New York City, but it's rare that you go to a cancer institute where the rural outreach to 5 surrounding states, and in some cases very vulnerable populations, Native Americans, you've got veterans, you've got minority groups and others who otherwise would not be able to access cancer care. And we have rewritten the rules, so to speak, on how to cover and provide best practices for these populations as well. So what you're going to find and hear about here is very unique, and we're just honored and delighted to have you here, Mr. Vice President. So delighted. Let me now turn the floor over to you, and I'll allow you to take this conversation with our panelists in any direction you would like.
Gov, thanks. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Elder Ballard, excuse me, as we used to say in the Senate, they still say in the Senate, as Orrin will acknowledge, a point of personal privilege. I want to thank you and the other apostles for the courtesy you've extended to me from the time I was a young senator. I had one of the great advantages. I don't know how many people have had it to get to meet with at least, I think it was 7 of the apostles at the Tabernacle as part of my education back when I was a young senator back in '87. I'm a student of comparative religion. I am a fan. I admire all that you've done. And today, your colleagues did me an enormous, excuse again the personal privilege here, an enormous honor. I was over at the library, and they presented me with 5 volumes of the genealogy of my family going back hundreds and hundreds of years. A great personal friend of Orrin's, mine, yours, Senator Gordon Smith, had come to me with 2 of your colleagues, one of who's now sadly passed away last year, to present me with this gift. And Governor Herbert understands, you've probably heard me talk about this before. And I have to tell you, it did 2 things. One, it reinforced my understanding and the depth of the generosity of LDS Church, but also the point that you made about the Utah database, which I've received a little bit of education on. The governor came, thankfully, to see me when the president announced the establishment of this effort and talked about the database. And Governor, you said there are 3 things that represent this great enterprise your father and mother undertook. If my father were here, he'd look at you and say, "Kid, you've got good blood." And that is the power of community collaboration, the power of large amounts of accurate data relating to the health records and well-being of families, which the largest genealogical aggregation of material is under the auspices of the LDS Church, and which I just was the beneficiary of. And everywhere I go in the country, and I'm going to mention some of it just so you know, I keep hearing about the importance and consequences of big data and it being open and being able to be shared, but I'll get back to that. And the third point you made is this whole notion of the way everybody works together here. And if I could, and I've been to some of your great fellow institutions around the country and around the world, if this could be a model that would be replicated throughout the country and the world, I honest to God believe that we would make exponential progress in what is going to be still an enormous fight. So, Governor, thanks for your invitation. Thank you for your political leadership. Thank you for your foreign policy leadership. But most of all, thank you for your decency and your integrity. By the way,
I thought you were going to say for marrying way above myself.
Well, I was going to mention that in a moment. As they say in southern Delaware, and Orrin's been there, I talk at you like this. When I married my wife Jill, I was in the southern part of the state. Actually, it was a reception at the caucus room that my colleagues put on for me. You were there, Orrin, when Jill and I got married after I lost Amelia, and James O. Eastland. I walked up to him. He was an old fellow from Mississippi, talked at you like this. He grabbed my hand, Governor, didn't look at me, looked at Jill and said, "Son, you married up." Son, you married up. We do have that in common. But really and truly, Gov, the whole system would be better if we had more men and women of your caliber and integrity in both our parties. And to my friend, Orrin Hatch, we have been friends since 1974. We've been on the opposite side of a lot of issues, but we have never, that I'm aware of, had a cross word.
That's right.
We have never been anything other than straightforward with one another, and we have never been anything other than courteous. And I think it has to do with a similar view of the most important thing, family. And so it's always a pleasure to be with you, Orrin. And Orrin flew out early this morning to be here. I know he's home all the time, but it was just gracious for you to do that. When I decided to not seek the nomination of my party this year, which brought a sigh of relief to a lot of Democrats, but all kidding aside, when I decided to do that, the president was gracious enough to walk out in the Rose Garden with me when I made that announcement. And I had no agenda in mind, but I did say, as you've continued to do, John, I did say it's my plan not to run, but not to disengage, that I'm going to stay engaged. And I said that the one regret I have is I would have loved to have been the president who oversaw at this inflection point in the area of research and development a fundamental shift in our war on cancer. And to my surprise and to my great pleasure, my great friend, and this is nothing political about this, Barack is my friend. We are personal friends. Our families are friends. Our daughters, our granddaughter and his daughters are each other's best friends. They vacation together. They're in the same schools together. They play in the same teams together. And it surprised me when he announced at the State of the Union that he was going to redouble the effort to deal with this issue and put me in charge of it. And he put forth a presidential memorandum to the heads of all the federal agencies that have any impact on dealing with the fight against cancer. And they include HHS, the National Institute of Health, the National Cancer Institute, the National Science Foundation, the Defense Department, the Commerce Department, the Energy Department, Veterans Affairs, which is the largest hospital in the world, the Office of Management and Budget, the National Economic Council. He did it for a simple reason. Just as when he put me in charge of the Recovery Act, which was a over $800 billion initiative, he gave me the authority to task them in any way that I saw fit to be value added in this fight. And one of the great jobs, your governor said the same thing when he was lieutenant governor, one of the great jobs was that I have with the president, whatever assignment he gives me, he gives it to me and I never have to, I just am able to do it and then I have to check back. And so, as the head of that task force, I've asked these very people that Orrin deals with every day and knows better than almost anyone around. I asked them to be guided by 4 or 5 recommendations that are initially out of the box. One was accelerate the understanding of cancer, period, so it's translatable to ordinary people and they understand what we're talking about. And it's prevention, early detection, treatment, and cure. But the second thing is improve, and this is what you've been all about, Gov, in addition, is improve patient access and care, support greater access to research, data, and computational capabilities. You know, as we know, 75% of the oncologists are out there. They're not associated with any of the great institutes or hospitals like you. Encourage the development of cancer treatment and identify, most importantly, which they weren't crazy about, but identify any regulatory barrier or administrative reform that exists at the federal level that is an impediment to, a legitimate impediment to, you in the field being able to do the work you need to do. And optimize the federal investments, provide incentives for public-private partnerships to coordinate with the federal government. But it's also my responsibility to eliminate any roadblocks or bureaucratic impediments that negatively impact on the work or research you're doing. And so the first meeting after I met with the federal governmental agencies and the cabinet secretaries to make it clear how I was going to proceed, the first meeting where I invited outside folks of your caliber to come and meet, it was suggested I have it at NIH. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it at NIH. I'm doing it at my home. Because I also don't want to leave the impression, I say this to the press, that this is going to be a federal government-run operation. We can be significant value added if we do it right. But it's going to come from not just the federal government, it's going to come from all of you out in the field where the vast majority of the expertise exists. And we have some serious experts at the federal level. We have the guy heading up the NIH was one of the leading innovators in cracking the human genome. I mean, there's some really brilliant people that are engaged. So I've, subsequent to this first meeting at a federal level, I decided to basically go on a listening tour. Because the other thing I want to make clear is it is not my intention in any way to turn this into where, like for example, it was convenient. They have some great people at Abramson Center at Penn. But when I went to Penn, the Philadelphia Press tried to say Biden announces moonshot at Penn, like this was going to be, Penn-centric deal. I don't know whether my staff, I think they took it out of my talking points, but what I had here was all kidding aside, do we have the list of all the institutions that I have gone to? When you retyped this for now, you didn't include those institutions. But the point I'm making is that it's really important for everyone to understand that that I have now spoken to well over 200. Is my staff out there? Do you actually have that copy? For real, not a joke. It's really important that I make this clear because they retyped this, Gov, and I'm sure is inadvertent. They're fired. But I've met with over 200 of the leading oncologists and researchers in the world, with several Nobel laureates. I've been to a number of the great institutions like yours, from MD Anderson to the University of Pennsylvania to Duke. I'm heading from here to the University of California in San Francisco with some of the great people you've all collaborated with. I have met with 2 Nobel laureates. I have met with international consortia in Europe at Davos. And basically what I'm trying to do is, yes, I just want you to know what I've done. I've met with 220 leading oncologists, researchers, traveled to MD Anderson, Abramson Cancer Center at Penn, Duke University Cancer Center. Tomorrow, the Helen Diller Family Comprehensive Cancer Center at the University of California, San Francisco. I'm here with Dr. June at the University of Pennsylvania, one of the world's top immunologists. Dr. Toby Cosgrove, who runs the Cleveland Clinic, which does not just do that. Dr. I'm going to mispronounce his name. Caligari, the oncologist doing pioneering work in molecular biology in cancer at Ohio State. Comprehensive Cancer Center, Doctors Jose Bacella and Charles Sawyers, who are breaking new ground with molecular targeted therapy at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I'm going to be heading to the Stanley Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins University, where they're pushing the boundaries of research and the development of delivery of new treatments. I have met with Dr. Al Young, who is the head of the Department of Neuro-Oncology at MD Anderson, who was in charge of my son's treatment and his new GBM Agile treatment that includes over 112 folks, including leading German, Chinese, Japanese scientists working on there to ensure better outcomes. I've met, in addition with John, with philanthropists, a number of them representing literally several $1 billion of investment. I've met with insurance companies, which I have some discussion with about sharing data, and I've met with organizations, big data firms, cancer organizations like Orion, Cancer Link Q, Project Genie, the Quilt Coalition, all of whom are doing great work, but in my view, doing redundant work. They're all trying to go for the same holy grail, spending hundreds of millions of dollars to try to accumulate the kind of database you have here. And the question is, I'm going to ask all of you your opinion. Should this be more collaborative? Should there be more work and to move more quickly? And there seems to be a consensus around a few issues, which I'd like to talk with you today. First, to state the obvious, but it's not obvious to all the listeners here and national press that's here, is that cancer is a genetic disease that changes the way cells in the body multiply and divide, and we now know that there are hundreds of cancers, and each one changes throughout the course of the treatment. 15 years ago, the idea was you identified the cancer, you treated that cancer, and the cancer was not like to mutate or change. Well, I know from my own, by the way, when I reference my son, it's not about my son, it's about the knowledge I was able to gain firsthand from going through 2 years of dealing with trying to save his life. But between the 50s and well into the 2000s, the major thrust of cancer treatment, and it's the reason why you all were so revolutionary, was identify the cancer, kill the cancer cells as fast as you can kill them, excise as much as the tumor as you can, excise as much as can be done, use targeted radiation and as dosage is as large as and targeted as you can do it, and then as much chemo as the body could stand. But we're at an inflection point the last 5-7 years of my observation, is that that phase, and I hear many of your colleagues, Doctor, I'm not suggesting any one of you say this, but was some decades of some basically fairly barbaric treatment, not deliberately, but it takes, as we all know, all of you who have had folks suffer from diagnosis of cancer over the last 10, 20 years, it is, the collateral damage, the pain, the suffering. What's now I'm learning from most of you is that chemo and radiation are still worthwhile. Excising as much of the tumor makes a difference, but low doses and much more targeted, because what's happening is you're killing an awful lot of not only healthy genes but the immune system. And I remember not long ago where a lot of you in the field looked at immunology like it was a voodoo, like it was. I'm not being a smart guy. I'm serious. This is where I'm so excited about what's happening here. There was only a sort of a limited window back when my grandmother died of stomach cancer, when I won't go through the litany of my family, but when they died, there was viewed as a limited window here. You identify it, you knock it out as quick as you can, but we're now at an inflection point, and it's generating an incredible amount of optimism and results. The real breakthrough, in my view, and I'm not the expert, or I'm trying like the devil to become as educated as I can be on the breadth of this field, but 15 years ago was where the FDA first approved a drug targeted to a specific cellular cancer, and that had gone wrong in a cancer cell. I mean, that was kind of the idea that's sort of standard practice for you all now, was like that was a new thing. Today, there are more than 1,700 drugs in development, not poisons, not chemo, not radiation, and they're targeted treatments, and they attack or compensate for specific changes in cancer cells. And as we speak, the number of things are coming together at the same time. The technology driving immense advances in genomics, immunotherapy, virology, combination therapies. And I predict you all are going to be talking more than you do now about what may have been viewed 15 years ago as intensely targeted ultrasound, which is a field that is being now pioneered in a way. One of the men who saved my life, I had 2 cranial aneurysms, the head of the Department of Neurosurgery at University of Virginia, Neil Cassells, is working that area very well. At first, it's like targeted ultrasound. I mean, that's not, that's, mark my words, you all get ready. I became a lawyer because I wasn't qualified to be a doctor. But here's the point. Just 6 years ago, scientists at the University of Washington sequenced the genome of a 50-year-old woman with acute myeloid leukemia. It was the first time they were able to decode the entire DNA sequence of a particular cancer by comparing the genomic sequence of a tumor that of the healthy cells. As recently as 2 years ago, it took 6 weeks to sequence a cancer genome. Now, it costs less, although it's very expensive, than $1,500, can be done in less than a day, allows doctors to provide personalized, tailored treatment based on the genomics of an individual tumor. Anyone dealing with cancer knows how much time matters. It matters a great deal. And so, just in the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen incredible breakthroughs in science because of the brilliant women and men sitting around this table. And it's all, in my view, brought us to an inflection point and offers hope that didn't exist 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. But during the listening sessions and tours of information gathering that I've undertaken as earnestly as I can, a number of key issues keep coming up again and again. So one of the reasons I'm here, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm almost finished, is I want you telling me not only what you're doing, but what we should be doing, how the federal system can get out of the way, how the FDA or NIH can help more, how we can do a whole range of things that many of your colleagues have talked to me about. First, we know that there are multiple disciplines needed to attack cancer. It was interesting, John, I keynoted the Davos meeting this year, and as Orrin and John and some of you know, it brings together over 2,600 CEOs from all around the world and the heads of state of probably 60 nations. I was the keynote on the issue of the fourth industrial revolution, the consequences for jobs in the middle class. But since that time I was asked to do that, Klaus Schwab, who founded it, found out that the moonshot was there. And he said he got enormous response from participants, would I do a roundtable at the moonshot? And so an audience about 3 times the size of the one in front of us now, made up of some of the most sophisticated CEOs in the world. I watched the looks on their face, John, when the panelists began to speak. The first panelist started off, the name's escaping me right now. My staff will help me, I hope, somewhere along the line. But he started off and he started talking about a particular gene that human beings have one copy of, but elephants have 20. And everybody looked like you guys are looking, most of them like, what in God's name does that have to do with anything? And you all understand. And he went through about how the development in evolution and why the elephant had 20 genes, they don't give birth till after age 50, why. And then we heard from a Nobel laureate who was a biological engineer. And people wondered, well, what in God's name does an engineer have to do with this? But what the disciplines required, immunologists, geneticists, virologists, molecular biologists, chemical engineers, biomedical engineers, radiologists, so many other disciplines. Technology companies adapted supercomputing and aggregating, analyzing data, new treatments of immunotherapy which direct the body's own immune system to attack the cancers. Emerging fields like focused ultrasound and particle beam therapies with targets of which targets with surgical precision to specific tissue to potentially destroy cancers with minimal damage to surrounding cells. But for too long, researchers and physicians have been, in my view, as I'm learning more about this, trapped in silos, self-imposed or actual silos. Oncologists didn't work with immunologists for a while ago. Virologists didn't work with geneticists. I was down at Duke, as you know, John. They did a case study of 32 people where they injected poliovirus into the brain of young patients with glioblastoma, which is, most of you all know, is basically a death sentence, stage 4 glioblastoma. MD Anderson did the same thing with my son with a different virus. I met this beautiful, in every way, young woman who finished nursing school, who had stage 4 glioblastoma and is cured now by that. But what they don't know is why did it work on her and why didn't it work on others? The generic point I'm making is there is so much that that requires more collaboration that indicate we could and should be working together. Not only are the disciplines I mentioned beginning to work together, but that's what I mean by an inflection point. We've never been at this place before. Think about it. We have more of the pieces, but we need to put them together to understand all of the targets, possible therapies, and how to combine them. For the first time, we can see what the ultimate solution is going to look like, but whether we can get there in 10 or 50 years depends upon how quickly we put all these pieces together and, in my view, break down some of the silos, although I have not reached a firm conclusion as to exactly what those are yet, but I have some notions and I want to talk to you about it. Look, I don't think you've ever seen in all your endeavors the sense of as much hope and expectation that exists out there right now. And it brings me to the second issue that often comes up, and it came up today when I was presented with my genealogy, when I was introduced a month or so ago by Governor Huntsman to the Utah Population Database. It brings me to this second issue, the immense opportunity that rests with unprecedented access to technology and data, or big data, as it is referred to. That came up over and again in Davos, at Duke, at Penn, at every institution I've attended. Almost every cancer center keeps a database of information in genetic history, medical records. None go far back as yours do, but if I was saying to Oren, I know Oren's not big on the Affordable Care Act, but and we love each other, but unrelated, in the Recovery Act, which he wasn't crazy about either, but in the Recovery Act we put in $35 billion for electronic health records, which, if we ever get them standardized, can have a profound impact on in fact, access to this data. And so medical records, tissue banks, genetic information, they can hold the key to certain therapies. But tapping this treasure trove of information, and the people I've spoken with, seems to be vital, like it is for your population base here, to make some exponential progress toward dealing with cancer. It includes records here of more than 8,000 Utahns, pairing medical records with other official records from cradle to grave, going back over a century, including genetic profiles and cancer diagnoses going back several decades. The database alone is being used in your database in 200 active medical research projects, allowing doctors to unlock new findings to perfect new treatments. Now, the basic question seems to me that arises, what type of data do we need in this database? But that's for you all to decide. We need to know the genetic changes that cause a particular cancer. We need to know how to attack that cancer and multiple ways when the changes occur. We need to know how the cancer will be resistant to our efforts. We need to know what combination of efforts and therapies can knock out the cancer completely. Patients' records, as I said, used to be on paper. Now they are increasingly more readable and accountable. But community colleges, who treat 75 of all the cancer patients in the nation, if we had this base down, they could potentially match treatment plans to the genomes of their individual tumors, of the tumors they're treating. They don't know that have access to this information many places. But the data is trapped in the silos, it's locked away in individual institutions, limiting prospects. And so one of the questions I want to talk to you about is how to unlock that data. Look, I met with Secretary Ernie Moniz, the Department of Energy, and I know Orrin would acknowledge he's a brilliant mind out of MIT, and so he said he wanted to talk to me as part of this group that I, quote, have in this task force. And the reason he wanted to talk to me is that there is a thing called the National Strategic Computing Initiative at the federal level. What that is it is an attempt to make supercomputers capable of doing 1 billion computations per second. 1 billion computations per second. And it's well underway, and he thinks we're going to achieve that result relatively soon. But you know what we can do now? Now we're able to compute 1,000 billion computations per second. When we get to 1 billion, that is multiplying 1,000-fold the ability to access big data and compare these. The future is mind-blowing as to what can unlock answers that even the brilliant minds around this table, with all the time and effort in the world, are not going to be able to do comparable to this computing capability. With more cooperation, greater computing power, it seems to me we can make more accessible to researchers all this information who can use it to uncover new therapies and perfect drugs. But here's why it matters. Researchers are essentially looking for needles in a haystack. And they get enormous amounts of help from finding those needles when supercomputers can analyze large amounts of data and uncover hidden patterns and developments in cancer that aren't able to be seen by the naked eye and or all of the collaboration in the world. Why does a particular treatment or drug cure and help 10% of the patients with what is initially identified as the same cancer, while 90% of those patients with the same cancer generates no positive impact? When tens of thousands of data aggregated in one place using supercomputer capability, it increases exponentially the prospects that may hold a key to why the 90% of the respondents didn't respond. And so, Governor, the point is, it seems to me we need to make sure information is being shared so oncologists in Logan and Ogden can access information from world-class institutions like right here at the Huntsman Institute, or as a top cancer researcher told me, we have to allow the data to actually yield answers, and that can be fully within our power. The big issue that brings me here today is how do we make sure all the advances we're talking about can get delivered to everyone who needs it, who are often shut out. Characteristic of John Huntsman and the Huntsman family, when he sat with me talking about what the Cancer Institute does, he talked to me about his concern for populations being left behind, which is sort of classic, populations left behind. You know, and he talked about the over 80,000 square miles area, 96% of which is rural, 70% frontier. And you're you're ensuring treatment for communities that are often neglected, including Native American tribes and nations. I met at Duke, University of North Carolina was part of that meeting, a young doctor, very impressive, named Dr. Stephanie Wheeler. You may or may not know her. Presumptuous of me to suggest, doctor, I think it'd be a useful thing to talk to her because she's doing the same thing you're doing in a different way. She has done extensive studies on the disparities of cancer diagnosis and treatment in the African American community in the Black Belt. There's gigantic disparities that you're uncovering. And so maybe there is some correlation and approaches as to how to deal with it. And she could learn from you, and maybe she has something to offer. But what I want to hear is how you made this a central part of your mission. And for me, what are the questions I should be asking? What are the questions I should be asking your counterparts? And what are the questions I should be asking internally? For example, it's only recently the FDA has allowed adaptive trials. Well, you know, I imagine if that hadn't begun, one of the things you may say to me, Joe, wait a minute, adaptive trials are something that we need to be doing. You have to break that down. It's happened already, but I'm giving an illustration. You know, take the lung map collaboration between the National Cancer Institute and a number of pharmaceutical companies. Together, they're working on clinical trials with combination treatments for patients with lung cancer. That's new. That is a relatively new breakthrough. Before, when drug A was meant for a certain cancer and drug B for another, researchers discovered that the combination of use of drug A and B may very well be more effective. But there are no incentives from some of the insurance companies to combine the two because of the patents that exist. But what if that were to change? Imagine the possibilities. And I'm not in any way diminishing the necessity of a profit motive here. I don't mean to suggest that. But there's got to be ways we can work our way through some of this. You know, what are some of the other examples? You know, every place I go, doctor, what I hear is there ought to be more clinical trials accessible to people. What is 94% of the people with treated cancer are never part of a clinical trial? And I've been given from other institutions like yours, Gov, examples of how that could be done safely and more broadly. But is that important? You know, how do we expand access if we should? How do we do it? How do we reduce cost? There's a whole range of questions that you are dealing with that one of which is still not resolved. Who owns their records of their own human genome? Well, you get two answers. Part of the problem is at the federal level, but part of it's out in the community. Okay, well, you know, it may be that the institution says, granted, it was Beau Biden's cancer gene that we went ahead and we analyzed, but we did a number of added things to that are proprietary, and they're not owned by the patient. That may make sense. I'm not sure it does. I warn you. What would happen if every patient knew they owned their own medical records and all that was done? And what about if we can't break down some of these silos in relation to big data? I can imagine Governor going on national television and saying to all those people, you own your data, if they did, and I respectfully suggest you go to one or two of these repositories and make it available. I guarantee you I could get between 5 and 10 million people to do it overnight. That may not be a good thing, may be a very good thing. So they're the kinds of things, in addition to tell me what you're doing, I need to hear from you. I've taken a long time, but I have a lot to learn. So thank you. And Doc, why don't I turn to you, or you, Mr. Chairman, and proceed any way your folks would like to proceed.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for all you're doing. I mean, we've just heard from somebody who has had a personal cancer experience, but has also become a researcher. You really have. It's so impressive. And I think you really make it so clear why we in the cancer research community are so excited about where we are today, because we really are at an inflection point. The investment that has been made is paying off, and we're all together. If we can work together and effectively leverage and harness this information, we can really accelerate progress. So I think we're just all thrilled to have you here and have the opportunity to share a little bit about our perspective in line with the highlights that you already mentioned. You know, I think we're all focused on this area because in the United States alone, 600,000 people die from cancer every year. That's one person every minute of every day. Just think of the number of people who we've lost just while we're sitting here talking about this important challenge. And a really interesting point, I think, in that regard is that half of those folks that succumb to cancer succumb to a cancer that could have been prevented. So in the whole landscape of precision medicine, I think it's really important not just to focus on the cancers that couldn't be prevented, which we must focus on, you know, and that's where the targeted therapy comes in and the treatment piece comes in. And I think there's also a really important opportunity to put some emphasis on the cancers that could have been prevented. And that I sort of put under the, you know, big umbrella of, you know, you could think about it as precision prevention. And I want to just emphasize how important that is. You've heard about how we at Huntsman Cancer Institute have been working with our partners, Intermountain Health, with the LDS Church, with the state of Utah, to bring together this remarkable Utah population database resource with 8 million people and lots of information. We use that information in lots of ways, but let me just share a little bit about the precision prevention piece, because I think that's something that really could contribute to our success in ameliorating suffering from this disease. So you heard about how we discovered genes like the colon cancer gene, and you heard from Greg what that meant for his family. We spoke to one of our patients who has a history of colon cancer in his family, and it used to be that all the people that had this cancer-causing gene got colon cancer by the time they were 25 or 30 and died soon after that. Now we know that because we can screen and identify those people, identify the risk and screen them, he's alive long past the time that he should have been dead if that science hadn't moved forward. So that's an example of precision prevention. But think about all of these data. You talked a lot about big data and how if we can bring them together and access them and use them in important ways, how we can really make progress. Think about all the questions that you can ask. You're sitting here and you're learning all about the cancer landscape and you're coming up with questions. This is what we do when we look at all of the data in the Utah population database. So for example, you might ask the question, we know that colonoscopy is a great way to prevent colon cancer, right? It can identify small precancerous lesions before they become cancer, and we can remove those. We have screening guidelines that say you should get a colonoscopy every 10 years, for example, if you're not a high-risk individual. But we also know that some people still get colon cancer, even though they're adhering to those screening guidelines just perfectly. So we would ask in the clinic, why? And how do we get the answer to that question? Well, we can access this Utah population database, and we've done that now, and looked at all of the colon cancers in the entire state of Utah with our combined data, gone in and figured out, using the medical records, which of those cancers came up in people who were having their regular screening and should not be getting colon cancer. And then mine down even further and figure out why those cancers were missed, right? So our physicians here and our scientists figured out that there's a certain region of the colon where those things mostly come up. So that tells us we've got to spend more time when we're doing colonoscopy in that region.
I hope the press is getting this. No, I mean it. No, I'm being deadly earnest. This is one of the single most important things to happen, and that is for people to understand what we're talking about here. All this stuff about big data is like, Bigfooting. What's big data have to do with anything? But you're explaining
Get it?
in plain. I really mean it. I really mean taking people through
Yeah.
and telling the story, what it means. So now your point is, you figure out, you go to a different part of the colon, you have to focus on it more.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
that's what people have to understand about what all the data that can be yielded from being able to access this material.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Let's assume, for the sake of discussion, there was a genetic, for lack of a better phrase, most people think a biopsy of every colon cancer that is detected in the United States from the year 2010 on. And it was all located, all colon cancers in the colon were identified and put in one database. Would that increase even greater the possibility of being able to know how to treat a cancer? There's 100 different cancers, a cancer within the colon? Or is that not, it need not be precise like that? It can just be generically where the cancer is found and move from there. Does my question make any sense?
Totally.
Is there a sense of what would be useful?
The tissue is useful, but I think what you really need is the family history information. The tissue alone is not nearly as powerful as having the family history, because what you really want to know is who's affected and then who's not affected. And by having the families, which is what's so powerful about the data here in Utah, you have the ability, you have the ability to figure out why somebody is affected and why somebody isn't, and that is like a magnifying glass for understanding the genetic
How can we
cause
begin
disease.
to replicate in other parts of the country the Utah database? We're not going to go back and find 8 million people or 800,000 or 80, but how do we from this point on? Shouldn't we be thinking about aggregating family histories and data from this point on in the nation as a whole? Am I making any sense? What are the kinds of things we should be building to not replicate, but to simulate what you've done here because of the LDS Church and the access to the Utah database?
And
So
what
one-
are the institutional barriers?
Yes,
Yeah,
both.
I mean, academically, that might be a
Yeah.
good discussion, but in terms of putting it to practice, and Vivian would be in a pretty good position to answer this, institutionally, what are the challenges of allowing us to do just that, aggregating that kind of data and information?
Well, I think that the name, the Utah Population Database, is somewhat misleading because it implies that the population is only Utah. We have, through the generosity of the LDS Church, an agreement to update the Utah Population Database, which, as you know, is a public resource. It has contributors from Intermountain, from the Department of Health, and from the University of Utah, and many others. And in that agreement, we're expecting more than 100 million additional individuals will be entered into this database. So really, we should think about the Utah Population Database as, yes, it started in Utah, but actually it's really a national and almost international population database. I don't think it's really necessarily a question of replicating that or trying to reinvent that. I think really the question is, how can we build on that?
Right, okay, well, that's the question. So how do you build on that so that you end up with a considerably larger, because it represents, even at 100 million, it represents a relatively small portion of the population as a whole over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 decades. And so is more data increasingly valuable, or do you reach a point where, and these are the questions I get asked by when I'm out with the public at large, I get asked by my colleagues in public life, I get asked, we've had well over 100,000 cancer patients contact me. Over 100,000 just since this has been announced, whether it's on Facebook, on the internet, in letters, in direct communications. And so these are the kind of questions I get asked.
So can I just chime in a little bit? So I'm not from Utah. I'm from Providence Health and Systems, which is a large hospital system based in Washington, Seattle, Washington. And the Utah database is incredible and an enormous asset. And it doesn't tell the whole story because it doesn't have the medical histories, I believe, with the entire system.
It does.
So that the abstracted information from the medical record together with any of the other factors, the socioeconomic factors and the exposure and where people lived throughout their life. So there's other databases that also add value. So while love the idea of expanding some sets of data, would hate to do it in exclusion of other types of innovative data sets that might look at other factors that go into cancer risk.
Well, let me ask you this question. I'd like to stay, this is really helpful to me. Why is it then that you have literally, if I calculate correctly, well over an additional $1 billion contemplating being invested by half a dozen major institutions that include everything from Cancer Link Q to Orion and all of them. They're all creating their own additional database. Does that make sense?
So maybe I can just, go ahead.
No, it just, does it make sense? Probably not. I just wonder, Mr. Vice President, if this isn't the time to have the federal government look at an initiative of what kind of a database do we want to create, have a uniformity of database. We chose, unfortunately, in my view, to not have a uniform database as we created our electronic medical records over the last 20 years. And so you have proprietary databases that don't talk one to another. And while the Utah Population Database collects all the things that we just talked about, Dr. Lee spoke of, there are other things that we need to figure out how we're going to add to that as we're sequencing genes of individuals, of families, of tumor genomics. As you know, that requires a tremendous amount of storage, and this National Strategic Data Initiative seems like that would fit right in. It seems to me, and some of you who are experts like Dr. Sweetenham can speak more clearly to this, but it seems to me like to establish a standardized way that we're going to keep this record, and go forward so that everybody's doing it that way so we can talk one with another.
Well, that, the problem is I've learned that logic is not always applicable to sometimes bureaucratic or political, the small p, problems. And I've met with folks who are neither Democrat nor Republican. I don't know what they are. They're part of the president's PCAST board, some of the leading scientists in the world. Eric Lander, who is one of the most, he's not a cancer expert, but he's a brilliant guy. What was intended, it's only been 3 years since we've been funding the keeping of electronic health records. But what I don't think anybody anticipated in the shop at the time, there'd end up being sort of 4 proprietary suppliers who wanted to do that. That's nothing we had anticipated. The anticipation was, what didn't happen, is that there'd be, like in the human genome, standardized terminology that would be used across the board, and that it would be something that would accommodate the ability of docs to be able to do something very difficult, and that is begin to change a cultural way in which they kept records, understandably. That's not a criticism. It's a cultural change, though. So the question now is, Are there things, again, the federal government is not the answer to everything or most things, but are there things we should be doing internally recommending that we change the way in which that is done? Because it seems to me, if from this point on, every single patient had, there was a electronic record. Initially, we started this off because of the cost. You know, you go to your local doctor, you think you broke your arm, skiing. I love skiing here, by the way. It's my favorite thing. And, oh, no, I've been here. After my wife and daughter died, my sister set up, we'd have what we call the Boys Week Out. My two boys and I would come here every year and ski for a week. And I remember I was going down a black diamond as best I could, Governor, and the best I've ever skied in my life. And I hear a 14-year-old voice saying, "On your right," and I hear a 13-year-old voice saying, "On your left." And but I still skied with them. They're nice of me. But my generic point is that it is. It was designed. If I broke my leg up here, I'd see. You have great orthopods here. They'd fix my leg, but when I got home, if I'd have to, there was no way my doc could get that record. Yeah. There was no way my where I went for my X-rays could get that record. And if something happened, I couldn't take that record to the hospital. It was all designed initially to deal with, you know, how you streamline this. And so still today, it turns out we can't do a lot of that. So what are some of the things we should be doing, Doc, to make this more usable?
So I think what you've just described is really important, that we have to have some way that if we're going to have separate proprietary products, which may not be the best way, but that's what we have, that we can have them in a way that they can talk with each other. I think the other big component is, though, that, you know, we have embedded within our electronic medical records even now, you know, in the same way that you've spoken about various individuals being trapped in silos, there is a huge wealth of cancer-related and oncology data inside our electronic medical records that we can't get at because it's trapped into these silos that the language is not being right and, you know, different formats and so on. And so if we can, you know, look at inventive ways that we can pull those data out so that they can be added to the big data sets, I think that would be a huge advance. And we could go back years and pull data out of these systems that's already there, which would be incredibly valuable.
Well, it's interesting you raised that. I called a meeting, Orrin, of there are some incredibly talented young minds coming out of Silicon Valley and other places who are just on the incredible cutting edge of technological changes. And I put together two of these young companies. They're startup companies who they think they can, through their programming, create a language in effect that does exactly what you say, goes into existing data. Like, for example, the example I was given by in one record is saying he broke his leg. The other says he broke his femur, he fractured his femur. Well, the computer doesn't pick up. But they're working now. We're trying to get some of these brilliant young minds out there to go out and figure out ways to go back and pick up all the data already collected and rationalize it. I don't know enough to know, it's way above my pay grade whether they can do that. But the other piece is, what are some of the things, and I don't expect a specific answer, but I invite an answer that would be helpful to us, to me in this job I have. What are some of the things we could do to begin to self-correct that, or correct what is now, what was intended to be a treasure trove of information protecting privacy, but generating a treasure trove of possibilities that were usable? What do we do from this point on? What are the kinds of...
Mr. Vice President, let me just say something.
Besides, go to your committee and you get it done.
That's right. We will get it done, but let me just say, first of all, we're so grateful to have you here. You've been a wonderful friend all these years, and I have a great deal of respect for you, as you know. this database is more than just Utahns. These are people from all over the world, brought here in large measure by Mormon missionaries, or at least the initial groups. So we're down the line here quite a ways, but you're right. It would be wonderful if we had some sort of way of expanding this exponentially. And I'm very interested in what I'm hearing here today. These folks are really on the cutting edge of everything. And it isn't just Utah, it's national. And they're respected now throughout the world, really.
Well, Orrin, in my view, what John has done and his dad has done at the Huntsman Institute, and what the Utah population base has done, and how you've used it, it has awakened in a way that even 4 or 5 years ago, people didn't want to talk to me about this piece of it. There was very little discussion about this piece of it. And you'd say to somebody, big data, you go, okay, what are you, building a spaceship? I mean, what are you doing? No, but I really mean it. I really mean it. Well, look, you get the point that I'm struggling with here, and so and I don't want to keep you ad infinitum because I'm so interested in this. I'd take all your time, but I'd like you to put in the back of your mind, and anybody in the audience who has ideas about this. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Emma.
Vice President, I just want to just kind of give a perspective on the patient's view. So 3 aunties, a grandmother, a mother, and myself, and just recently my 37-year-old daughter, breast cancer. So when we're talking about that genetic makeup, we talk about how can we pull this all together so that if it's a hereditary type thing, how do we capture that? So on a patient's perspective, it's like if I had known all of that, or if it had been in a database, I could have taken it to my fabulous oncologist, Dr. Sandra Bies, and say, here is my history. Here is what's going on. And my 37-year-old daughter would have gotten diagnosed much earlier than she did last year. So us coming together, I always think about, can we take the ego out of it? Can we work together in collaboration where regardless of who gets the credit, it is done. So that's my perspective on being a patient.
Well, look, I think your perspective is absolutely correct. When doctors talking about prevention, the incredible work you've done on colon and breast here has enabled us to identify the percentage possibility of this being transmitted, I'm not going to use the right terminology, generationally.
You did it.
And on the prevention side of this, there's also vaccines that have been developed that are preventive, not just being able to be predictive and consequently watch you closely so it can be treated at the earliest moment it presents itself. There are vaccines that have been developed now, controversial because it relates to young women and a part of an anatomy, et cetera, but where it's demonstrated that if the vaccine is administered, you cannot get the disease. You will not get the disease. I know Dr. Patrick Sanchun, I know Dr. at Penn, the head of at Penn, Dr. My name's blanking. Who's the lead? June. Carl June. I know these guys are working on vaccines like you all are working on other forms of cancer. The other thing I'm finding out, Doctor, is that I always thought that cancers were defined by where they were located. Well, it turns out that that's not. No, but I mean, that's exactly how we treated it, by the way. You know, my grandpa, an old Irishman, and thank God it turns out I really am Irish. I was worried there. I was worried there for a minute that maybe I'd find out I wasn't. But
too much information.
That's right. But my grandfather, Ambrose Finnegan, a very bright guy, graduate of Santa Clara in 1907, a newspaperman, a very, very bright, well-educated man. He used to say, and Elder, you'll appreciate this more than more, he said there are three kind of politics, Joey. He said there's church politics, as in Roman Catholic. He said there are labor politics, as in union, and there are politics, and they're difficult in that order. Well, I would amend his statement. There are four kinds of politics. Cancer politics.
Oh.
No. Ask Orrin and me. The fight between whether we're going to focus on prostate cancer or breast cancer or lung cancer, or that's how the advocacy has been organized for the past 30 years. All good people. Well, in about 20 years, no one's going to be talking about that because it is similar cancer can co-locate anywhere or locate anywhere. So my only point is, as we learn more and more about the breakthroughs you guys are doing, and the cancer is a disease of the genome, that I think it's going to help us more in being able to focus resources in ways that are have a higher return. And so the one, if you could think for me about the notion of the aggregation of data and how important that is, what kind of data, what changes, if any, we should, to the extent that they're legislative, relative to how the data is kept, about breaking down what are now proprietary boundaries within it, because there's four major outfits who've gone in and provide the mechanisms but can't share. I'm going to say something self-serving. My son-in-law is one of the leading reconstructive surgeons in America. His name is, he's at Jefferson Hospital, rated as one of the best in the country. He does the major reconstructive work on cancers, on faces and backs. And the idea of him he tried to get an electronic record from another institution because it wasn't on the same, it wasn't the same provider. You can't get the information. There's a patient who is spending a 16-hour operation reconstructing this person's face. And so we've got to figure out ways to deal with that as well. And think about, for me, if you will, because I know you know a lot, and I'm going to ask everyone to say something before I shut this down, is what do we do about, quote, the patient's ownership of their own medical records, history, their genome, their tissue, et cetera? I mean, what should we be doing anything about that? Does that matter? Does that matter? And Doc, you haven't said anything yet, and I'm anxious to hear what's on your mind other than what in the heck is that guy talking about?
Well, thank you. I come from the perspective, not so much, although I do have things to say about big databases, but to talk a little bit about the issue of the rural and frontier.
Please.
And to start with, I'll tell you my thoughts. My interest in my research is in symptoms, in quality of life. And until very recently, our health records didn't capture the patient experience at all.
That's right.
And there's been a movement towards patient engagement, and we have been missing our biggest partner in their experience and understanding their symptoms and how their quality of life is affected. And we're just beginning nationally, but also within our university health system and at Huntsman to collect what is called patient-reported outcomes systematically. So that will be a part of the electronic health record pulled into all these databases, which is non-existent now, but we will be able to capture the patient's experience. So I'm very enthusiastic about discussion about databases and what data do we need in there, and just think we need to accelerate capturing the patient experience.
You know, it's, again, not about my beau, but about where I first learned that, is he was at 3 different hospitals as it related to convenience. He was the Attorney General of the state, so he couldn't always be going down to MD Anderson, where most of the work does. He was at Jefferson, and he was also at Walter Reed at the end. To hear your colleagues who are, and including the nurses.
I'm a nurse.
Who,
She's a nurse.
Oh, if there are any angels in heaven, they're all nurses. No.
Yeah.
You're talking to a guy with 7 months in the hospital, 2 months in ICU, 2 craniotomies. Let me tell you, I love docs, but man, nurses make you want to live, male and female. I'm serious. I am serious. You are so underestimated in terms of what you do. I don't know enough to know, Doc, but I think in a generation you're going to find that that attitude affects the immune system, and nothing affects the immune system like a nurse. Not a joke. Attitude. Oh no, I'm not joking. Watching these really, really brilliant nurses, and toward the end at Walter Reed, talking about the need to have patient outcomes and patient attitudes, patients' comments about how they responded to, how that felt, what it mattered. I mean, because they watch it, they do it every day, and it's interesting. I mean, in these roundtables, you're the first person who's ever raised that again from my personal experience watching the treatment relative to my son. And by the way, every one of them got in the car and showed up at his funeral, which was an amazing thing. It matters.
And I'd like to even expand on that to the rural and frontier areas, because one of the things that I think we have to do, and we're trying to do with the Huntsman model, is change who we see and where we deliver care. So we think about, we have a clinic or we have the hospital where people come to Huntsman for care, but just as we talked about the rural frontier area, most people are not here, and they have symptoms when they're not here. And the question becomes, how can we modify and be very patient-centered about tackling the problem of improving quality of life and symptom care when they're not right here? So in my own research, and with my colleague Susan Beck, we have developed an automated system to capture, to have patients report to us on a daily basis what symptoms they're experiencing when they're at home in Roosevelt or Helper, Utah, or far away from us. Where it's an automated system, it will capture that data. It will give them self-care coaching on what they should do, because it looks back and it's smart to know exactly what they said the problem was. Today, I have terrible nausea. The system will then tell them, what do you do for terrible nausea right now? It will also alert their nurses and their physicians about this person, your patient, has poorly controlled symptoms. And we developed and tested a system then where the abuse nurse practitioners who have then called back to those with poorly in a very efficient way with a decision support system, and to try to improve that care during the interim between clinic visits. And we found it to be extremely effective. That if you think of a day when you were asked on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your nausea? And the person said it was 8. The people in that category of severe nausea, severe symptoms, it reduced those days by 2/3.
It is, any one of you who have had cancer and dealt with this, when you're not in the clinic or the hospital, it is the most frightening thing for family members as well. And depending on whether or not you have a patient who is a husband, wife, son, or daughter, so many don't want to worry you, don't want you to know how badly they're hurting. And it is, I'd like to, with your permission, when we leave, have my staff be able to next week get on the phone with you and to go into more granular detail about how you're doing this. Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for being with us. Dr. Beckerly asked me to come and share a little bit of my family's story, and I think there's some, if I could take just a minute and explain what my father's gone through and how I think there's some key parts of that if we could change the way we look at and diagnose things, especially in rural areas, we could help save countless lives. So last May, my father, James Stannard, lives in Kalispell, Montana, small area, beautiful country. He'd been struggling for quite a few years with various symptoms, but hadn't been diagnosed. Last May, he was diagnosed with stage 4C thyroid cancer. He was emergency life-flighted here to Huntsman, which we're grateful that was able to happen. The doctors there in Montana gave him an initial 3 weeks to live diagnosis. The tumor was very massive. It had penetrated through his trachea, throughout the throat, all over. So we got him here, worked with a lot of the doctors here, pretty quickly realized that surgery was not an option. It was too invasive throughout the throat to be able to try surgery. So they moved into very intensive radiation followed by chemotherapy. You've expressed before, and it's exactly right. They push him to the brink, you know, and it's almost if the cancer doesn't kill him, the treatment will. It pushed him hard. Went through some very, very challenging times throughout that. But in working with the doctors here at Huntsman and going through the history and the family history and what had been happening, really got to, I think, the problems of missing his diagnosis for many, many years. He'd had his thyroid treated about 5 years previously. He should have been being watched much more thoroughly since then, and it was missed. In the 6 to 12 months prior to the cancer diagnosis, my dad's a PhD music professor. He knew his voice dropped about 1 octave over about 6 months. He knew something was wrong. He kept going to him and talking to him and saying something was wrong. They never imaged it. They never did the test they should have to see exactly what it was that was going on. At stage 3, the doctors have told us it's extremely curable, but at stage 4C, there's very little options left. In some regards, you know, it's tough to not blame doctors for missing something, but at the same time, you also have to understand they don't know what they don't know. And there's so much changing so rapidly that you have to understand that. But what can be done to make sure that, especially when you get outside of these major medical centers, that the doctors understand and know, they know how to diagnose, they know what to look for, they know to be able to catch things. Because, you know, as has been said, the earlier you catch it, the much more likely you are of being able to treat and cure the disease and prolong life. Since then, just as a real quick summary, my dad has had tremendous results. The tumor shrunk about 75% in mass, withdrew out of the trachea, and currently the last scan showed that it's not very active, and it's doing well. So while he's not curable, the last checkup from the doctor said you should have a great summer. So that was great news. And the confidence that he has in the doctors here at Huntsman has dramatically changed his perspective and his ability to feel positive and go forward with what he does. And you know, that's crucial too. And what we were saying with nurses. You don't appreciate a nurse until you need one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that story, and my heart goes out to you and your dad. You know, this is something that a lot of your colleagues around the country have spoken to me about, and that is, how do you get as you said, you don't know what you don't know. How do you get some of the treasure trove of information that exists and is knowable now at these great institutions out to the local oncologist who are treating 75% of the patients that are out there? And yes.
Well, I would love to address that because, as I said, we're a large system. We're 36 hospitals in Providence Health and Services, and everything from large urban institutions all the way through community access hospitals spread through Alaska and Montana and eastern Washington and Oregon. And so And we have one virtual cancer institute that spreads across all these facilities that allow our oncologists with expertise to work collaboratively with oncologists in the rural communities to get access to knowledge and information, and the whole concept of moving knowledge, not people, is where we try hard to go. At the same time, we also recognize that it's not only knowledge that we have to move. You know, one of your initial themes was on access. And we have significant barriers to access in care that aren't only access to expertise where you live, but also access to the cost of treatment. And even though with the AC...
Give me an example.
Okay, we had one patient in Montana, rural Montana, far out on, probably would call it frontier, who happened to be on parole. Very poor, very few resources, had no one in his community that could actually operate, because it wasn't just medical oncology, he needed actually surgical oncology, operate on his liver. And we had to go through, you know, he didn't have money for transportation, he didn't have money for hotel, he didn't have permission to leave the state. And so we had to work through our foundation and benefit dollars, collaborating with the parole system to actually get him to one of our hub centers for surgical oncology to be able to get the care he needed. It's a huge barrier for access, both in terms of cost and travel, much less all the cost of the oncologic drugs that take dollars out of us funding things like population health, because we're paying $200,000 for a course of treatment to buy 6 months of life. So access comes in multiple ways. It's distance, it's cost, its availability of resources, matching them to the local needs.
So I think that one of the principles that we have to try to think about when we're dealing with this rural and frontier issue is that most patients should be able to get their care close to home with their families, where their support systems are. And to your point, we need to find ways that we can share expertise that exists at places like this to, you know, help the local communities and to help the local oncologists who are taking care of these patients be able to do it. Here we're doing that by building a program of affiliate hospitals. We actually have two of the community oncologists who we work with, Dr. Joaquim and Dr. Virgilio from Wyoming and Colorado, who are here today. And we're working on establishing an affiliate network where we share expertise, we share protocols, we share clinical trials, and we have clinical patients drawn for clinical trials into Huntsman from 17% of the landmass of the country, and that's great, but what we really need to do is make sure that they have access to their clinical trials right at home, not here, because who wants to make a 600-mile round trip to get here? And so, you know, through these partnerships, we're trying to improve the access that these individuals have to these kind of treatments. The other thing that we're doing through a program at the University of Utah, which is called the ECHO program, is share expertise amongst specialists and amongst primary care physicians, so that in a virtual teleconference way, we get groups of practitioners together. They can come together over the phone. It can be as many people as 50 at once, perhaps around genetic counseling and advice about cancer risk. And then our experts here at Huntsman or at the University of Utah can share expertise not only around how to manage the patient who they're going to be seeing tomorrow, but also provide a more educational experience for them as well. So it's a way of helping us to provide support for doctors, nurses, all healthcare providers in their communities that actually will make it easier for them to take care of patients and allow the patients to be at home with their loved ones.
That's very helpful. Doctor, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, I
Please.
do. Thank you. So I want to address a few things that you've brought up, and one has to do with the question that you started out this segment of the conversation about, which is, what about patients owning their own data? And I think that's a really crucial question. When I'm in the clinic, I have the advantage of the fruits of the of the Utah Population Database and all the genetic discoveries. And one of the things that I always do is take a careful family history to see whether this is a family where we might be able to expand the understanding about the genetics in the family to try to initiate some of this precision prevention, as Dr. Beckerly mentioned. I think in every case, or almost every case, these individuals who are affected with cancer, and particularly who have family cancer histories, really want to provide that information.
Yeah.
And they are, in general, extremely anxious to provide their information, their DNA. And you've alluded to this, how many people have contacted you, and I think you said that you could have 200,000 samples from patients tomorrow if we wanted it. So,
That is my guess, just based on the, just as I'd say to Orrin and the governor, my political feel of just being around the country. I mean, it's just a sense that there is this overwhelming willingness to share. They want their privacy protected. There's ways to do that, to share their data if they think that is likely to not only help themselves but help other people. I mean, it's amazing the number, not to you all, but it's amazing the number of people that want to, knowing that my guess is your dad, as difficult as his condition is, would want to help prevent this happening for somebody else. I mean, it's amazing.
Absolutely.
The number of patients who are thinking beyond themselves. It just is. It makes you. It gives you such a greater sense of confidence in human nature that they are prepared to do it. So that's what I meant. I don't have any quote clinical data to suggest that, but I'm quite confident that that would happen.
I understand, and I think that's right. And the other thing that we're doing in that realm is, because of the Utah Population Database and some of the resources through that process, we've been able to obtain funding from the National Cancer Institute for the breast cancer family registries. So we've collaborated with 3 other sites in the U.S. and 2 sites internationally to combine our data about these families with breast cancer and share that data. And then if you take this one level further, this 6-site breast cancer family registry is also working with hundreds of other institutions to combine data to learn what we can about the causes of breast cancer, identify new genes, figure out what the environmental and geopolitical factors are that influence the likelihood of getting cancer. And I think this Huntsman model of going from the patient in the clinic to their families to try to identify who might else be at risk, and then enrolling those people in research projects is a really powerful way of expanding the knowledge.
That is, no, I understand. Can I don't want to leave it up to the governor when we conclude, but I'm going to make a concluding comment. I think that the whole notion of prevention, if all of a sudden everyone in America never picked up a cigarette again, would probably have a greater impact on cancer than all the breakthroughs you all are likely to make. There's also a great deal more research on environmental exposures that we never thought before. There's a new book I have not read. I understand it includes my son in it, but I have no evidence of any. Is burn pits in Afghanistan, Iraq, and he was stationed, and in Kosovo and in the Balkans, where my son served for roughly 2 years of his life. They're now finding, the VA, they're checking that, and when I say burn pit, it means everything is burned. They burn toxic material, they burn whatever they have to get rid of on a base in the middle of some godforsaken place they are. And there is a case being made, I have no idea if there's any truth to it or any foundation, but that the number of cancers that have occurred as a consequence of being exposed. There's environmental studies that are showing if people used the appropriate sunscreen, everyone did, we would drastically be able to cut cancers. So there's that whole, that prevention side. But then there's what you call the I never heard the phrase word precision prevention, and that is almost pre-notification because there's a genetic connection and there's a way to alert people what they have to do in order to at a minimum get it at an early stage. But it's not like you're administering medication that is preventing it from occurring. It is notifying as quickly as possible that may occur. And there's a third stage, and I hope my staff is keeping notes here, kidding aside. There's a third stage here is the actual prevention piece that relates to vaccines and other medical applications of drugs or using your own immune system to be able to prevent the cancer from ever appearing in the first place, whether you're at high risk or not. And there's a lot of work being done on those things, I am told. Not nearly enough on the overall prevention. Stop smoking, live a healthier lifestyle, don't let yourself remain obese, etc. There's all kinds of things. And there's a lot of research going on in fora that are beyond the, quote, cancer institutions that are focusing on people with cancer, figuring out how to prevent it from happening. The thing that surprised me, Governor, is that when you talk about access to rural communities and access of this cutting-edge information almost simultaneously when it occurs, or what immunotherapies work, what drugs work, etc., is the lack of broadband. So many places. And you say, what the devil does broadband have to do with any of this? Well, there is difficulty of a number of these oncologists who are not in frontier areas, but even in, I'm in the middle of the East Coast, in the middle of all these institutions, but my little state of Delaware, 2/3 of the state is part of what they call the Delmarva Peninsula. It's hard to get doctors to be there in towns of 2,000 to 20,000 people. I'm sure it's the case here in Utah. I assume it's the case here in Utah. And not having a high-speed internet to be able to access is part of the solution as well. So when I raise with my colleagues, we have to be investing more in high-speed internet, looking, what the devils does that have to do with cancer? How does that have anything to do with anything? The third piece on the sort of prevention scale is the enormous amount of work you all are doing on dealing with engaging the human being's own immune system in being able to fight the particular cancer or cancers generically. That gets into the realm where most people think, when I talk about cancer, well, that's the answer. And it is one of the answers. I'm not suggesting it's not. But only when you get into discussions of immunotherapy, genetic screening and sequencing, new means by which of being able to identify and attack the cancer, is when people think, well, now you're talking about cancer. There's so many of these other pieces that have to be in place, including the big one, and I just want to say, Governor, I'm encouraged because I meet with a lot of these major operations like yours, but that are working on their own databases, et cetera, and will have these long meetings and private. I never do those with the press, so people can be more forthcoming. And as I get up and the meeting is over, each of them is the head of each of the major initiatives. God will pull me aside and say, I hope you keep doing this. I hope you keep doing this. Because they're saying, I know we got to do this, but I don't have the swag internally to be able to all of a sudden say to them, just like your insurance companies, you know you should be doing a whole hell of a lot more in terms of what has to be done to share data. And they're beginning to work on it, but it's just a very difficult thing to break through the sort of paradigm that exists right now. And but I can't tell you, Gov, how much this is obviously considerably more useful to me than it has been to you. But it really, I am hopeful, because people are essentially, as they say in the southern, more conservative churches in my state, everyone seems to be starting to sing from the same hymnal here. Everybody's sort of getting on the same page. And so I think with your continued leadership, Governor, and by the way, other philanthropists around the country look to you, look to Huntsman. Brilliant, sometimes controversial guy who's spent $1 billion of his own money. Patrick Sansoon tells me how great you are. People who, and what you're doing here. And I'll end where you began. You said there are 3 pieces of this. I think you've got the formula. If the rest of it, if we could just get everybody on basically the same page, because the amount of the gray matter and the capacity and the ingenuity and the imagination that is being brought to bear right now is enormous, enormous. So I'm convinced, when I'm sure those of you who have family members who are diagnosed with stage 4 anything, like the representative is, I know every night when I went to bed, my prayer was, just let him live long enough for the science to catch up, because I know it will catch up. I know it will catch up. And so, folks, the goal that I have, I almost wish we hadn't used the phrase moonshot. What this is about, we're very level-headed about this. It's about aggregating the intellectual, the moral, the emotional, the scientific capital in this country to be able to do within 5 years what otherwise would take us 10 to 15 years to do it. I think we can do that, and that means thousands of lives saved and millions of lives affected, because every family that is affected by cancer, whether they have the disease or not, it is a cancer that affects the life of everybody in the family. And so I can't thank you enough for all you've done, John. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Vice President.
Let me just thank the Vice President.
If I may, before you close out.
Yes.
My name is Lacey Harris. I'm a Northern Ute, talking about the frontier and the rural. I'm one of those frontier rural people.
And you're a nation.
Yes. And I was strongly encouraged by the fact that you started out talking about the native health and those kinds of things, but somehow it got lost in this discussion. I just wanted to encourage you strongly not to leave us out, but to look into the health services that are offered to us as Native people on the reservations. And often we people in the urban cities have to go home to these health services. We are in strong need of rural and frontier services. I know the Huntsman Center has started, I think it's the Huntsman Center that has started a program down at the Navajo Reservation, dealing with these kinds of issues that all of you have talked about and discussed. But we need more of these kinds of programs, which means we need more involvement from people like yourself and the Huntsman Center, all these other people who are involved. It was exciting to hear that there's a doctor, a black doctor, that is looking into cancer among black people. I don't hear of any native doctors. In fact, we have very few natives in the health field. And so we need more of these kinds of programs, if you will, support, recognition primarily of our needs as Native peoples.
Let me make it clear, two things. One, when the governor came to me, the first thing he talked to me about.
You remember.
He did not come to me and talk to me about the institute, the Huntsman Institute, and it needed more of this, that, or the other thing. He did not come to me and talk to me about the incredible breakthroughs they've made in colon cancer and breast cancer. He did not come to me and talk to me about big data. He did not. He came and talked to me about one thing. He said, Joe, we've got to figure out how we get care to underserved populations. And then he explicitly named to me, if I'm not mistaken, 6 Indian nations you mentioned to me. You mentioned 6 in particular.
A few more than that.
But I mean, you just started down the list. And that's number one. Number two, if you know anything about me, you know that I was trained by Senator Danny Inouye. I understand the difference between a reservation and a nation. Okay, number one. Number two, and everything from the Violence Against Women Act I wrote, which was co-sponsored by my friend here, Senator Hatch, we have now made it applicable. You can apply it on the reservation. Everything from that to, but my generic point is we're trying like the devil to figure out how to get the services into the Indian nations in particular. And one of the problems is that it's not unique to Indian nations. You can't get services into rural communities in north central Pennsylvania with a population of 4,000 people. You can't get a doctor. You can't get a clinic. You can't get, and not because doctors are bad, and so that's why, for example, with Oren's help and others, when we help pay students' medical school bills to get to school, we say, by the way, you've got to commit time. You've got to commit time to be in these communities. And the last point, and I appreciate your frustration. Just understand, each of these doctors, when they're talking about underserved communities, are talking about Indian nations as well as the underserved communities that were mentioned here. But this guy was explicit, specific with me about your particular plight, and so I just want you to know that. Oh, and the last substantive point, the young, not young, oh, she's young. Everybody's young compared to me. The brilliant young doc from the University of North Carolina doing the study that I referenced that you might find interesting. She is a Caucasian American. She's not an African American. But she focused on the lack of health care in what they call the Delta, and the lack of diagnostic capability and the lack of treatment capability in those communities. And they deal with the same problem, I know, from your situation as well, which I know a little bit about. And that is, they deal with the same problem. It's awfully hard to get folks to go to the doctor, even if available. So we understand the impediments are there. We're all determined to do something about it. I don't know anybody more determined than the governor.
And we're building new models, and you see those in practice, so that's great. Mr. Vice President,
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
thank you. Let's just sum it all up by saying, I think all Democrats, Republicans, and independents have been transformed in this session. Politics have been put aside, and every American is behind you in your quest to lead out in finding a cure for cancer and making lives better. We applaud you for doing that, and I will say the bottom line from us, from this most remarkable community out here, is we're here to help. Not only the Cancer Institute, University of Utah, but our entire community, because we've created some models of excellence out here that I think are totally applicable. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the Vice
And I'm going to follow up to see if there's any ideas. I'm going to walk over here.